You make a choice. Maybe it's small. What to order, which email to answer first, whether to say something or let it go. And somewhere in the back of your mind, you assume that choice came from logic, from weighing the options, from being a reasonably rational person who thought it through. But here's the thing, it didn't. Not entirely, and it never really does. There is a version of you making decisions before the conscious, reasoning part of you even gets involved. A faster version, an older version, one that isn't interested in being logical, only in being safe, efficient, and right in the way that evolution has trained right to feel. And that version of you is running quietly in the background of almost every choice you think you're making freely. This isn't a character flaw. It's not something broken in you. It's something built into every human brain on the planet. And most people go their entire lives without anyone ever explaining it clearly. What we're talking about are cognitive biases, but not in the way they're usually described, not as mistakes to fix or flaws to overcome. More like default settings, patterns your brain adopted because at some point they worked, because they were fast, because they kept you from having to start from zero every single time you face the world. There are hundreds of documented biases, but 5 of them quietly shape the texture of everyday life in ways most people never fully see. The first is called confirmation bias, and it's probably the most intimate of all of them because it doesn't feel like a bias at all. It feels like clarity. You already have a sense of something, a belief, a suspicion, a feeling about a person or a situation, and your brain starts doing something very quiet and very consistent. It filters. Information that confirms what you already feel gets noticed. Information that contradicts it gets softened, explained away, or simply not retained. This isn't stubbornness. This isn't close-mindedness. It's efficiency. Your brain processes somewhere between 11 million and 40 million bits of information per second, but your conscious mind can only handle about 40 of them. Filtering is not a bug, it's survival. The cost, though, is that you can become increasingly convinced of something not because the evidence grew stronger, but because your brain stopped showing you the evidence on the other side. The second is the availability heuristic. It works like this. The easier something is to recall, the more likely your brain treats it as true, common, or dangerous. If you've recently heard about plane crashes, flying feels terrifying, even though statistically the drive to the airport is far more dangerous. If someone close to you went through a painful divorce, your sense of how often marriages fail quietly inflates. What your mind can picture vividly gets weighted far more heavily than what it has to work to imagine. Researchers have found that vivid, emotional, recent events essentially hijack risk perception, not because you're being irrational, but because memory has always been one of the brain's most trusted guides for what to expect next. The third is the sunk cost fallacy. This one lives in the chest. You've been in something long enough, a relationship, a project, a city, a career path, and even when the signs are there that it isn't working, something in you resists leaving. Not because you don't see the signs, but because you've already invested your time, your energy, your hope, your identity, and leaving feels like confirming that all of that was wasted. So you stay, or you invest a little more, hoping the output eventually justifies the input. The economics of this were described formally by behavioral economists, but the feeling is ancient. It's the mind's refusal to accept loss. It conflates past investments with future value, and in doing so can keep people anchored long after the anchor has become a weight. The fourth is the anchoring effect. First numbers, first impressions, first framings stick disproportionately. A salary negotiation that opens at a certain number will tend to settle near that number, regardless of what either party believes is fair. A product priced at $99 feels meaningfully cheaper than one priced at $100, even though the difference is a single dollar. This happens because the human brain doesn't evaluate things in absolute terms.
It evaluates them relative to a reference point, and whatever lands first becomes that point. The anchor isn't chosen consciously, it's simply the thing that arrived first, in the brain, always looking for a shortcut, treated it as a baseline. The fifth is the negativity bias. In this one is probably the most foundational of all, because it begins not in cognition, but in neuroscience. Your brain is not symmetrical in how it processes positive and negative experiences. Negative events register more deeply, are recalled more easily, and carry more emotional weight than equivalent positive ones. A criticism lands harder than a compliment lifts. A loss hurts more than an equal gain feels good. Psychologists have found that the brain processes negative stimuli in regions associated with threat response. It treats bad news the way it once treated predators. This was essential for survival. A brain that forgot danger died. A brain that forgot pleasure lived to experience it more of it. But in a modern world where most threats aren't physical, this asymmetry means you can spend significant time processing a single unkind moment while an entire day of warmth quietly fades. What connects all five of these is something worth sitting with. None of them feel like biases when you're inside them. Confirmation bias feels like discernment. The availability heuristic feels like common sense. Sunk cost feels like loyalty. Anchoring feels like context. Negativity bias feels like realism. They are invisible precisely because they feel accurate. They're not invading your thinking. They are your thinking, at the level where thinking happens fastest. And here's the thing that most conversations about cognitive biases tend to skip. Awareness doesn't dissolve them. You don't read about confirmation bias and then suddenly evaluate information symmetrically. That's not how the brain works. These patterns are not habits, they're architecture. What changes with awareness isn't the presence of the bias, it's the possibility of a pause, a moment where the faster version of you and the more reflective version of you can briefly exist at the same time. That pause is not a cure, it's not a fix, it's something quieter, a little more room between stimulus and response, a little more choice in what you do with what you feel. Not freedom from the bias, but occasionally some space around it. You have been making decisions inside these patterns your entire life. Every person you've ever met has been doing the same. Some of those decisions led somewhere good, some led somewhere painful. Most were a mixture, and none of that makes you irrational. It makes you human in exactly the way humans have always been, shaped by a brain that was built long before the world it's now trying to navigate. If something in this landed, if you found yourself recognizing a moment, a choice, a pattern you hadn't quite had words for before, there's more where that came from. The brain has other quiet tendencies worth knowing, and the closer you look, the more you start to understand not just why you decide the way you do, but who you've been all along.